When Piers Haggard first coined the term folk horror in a 2003 interview with Fangoria magazine while discussing his period horror film The Blood on Satan's Claw, he said that folk horror is about an aesthetic and a tone rather than hitting specific plot points or tropes. And it's this idea that makes folk horror movies so hard to pin down. Unlike slashers or more run-of-the-mill demonic possession fare, folk horror tends to follow more guidelines than actual rules. When discussing the elements that make up a folk horror film, most pundits refer to a chain. Usually a folk horror movie tends to be set in a rural location, featuring an isolated group of people who eventually display skewed morals and/or beliefs before the tension starts to ratchet up as the violence and/or supernatural events occur. But this is by no means definitive, and indeed can lead people to branding certain films folk horror when they're really not. By the definition above, one could claim that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Hot Fuzz are folk horror films. Some other opinions will offer that folk horror is any horror movie based on a folk legend, but I feel that's a little too broad. By that reckoning, any scary movie with Dracula, a werewolf, or characters speedily obtaining free healthcare after facing off Michael Myers would be considered a folk horror film. So we have one definition that is near universal to the horror genre as a whole, and another that is so specific and pedantic it leaves no room for experimentation or exploration. In the end, folk horror is one of those genres that you can't really define, but you know it when you're looking at it. For me, it tends to click during the rising violence and/or supernatural events section, which I prefer to think of as the shit gets weird rising action. Lord of Misrule was probably my first folk horror movie, and it has sent me down a rabbit hole of films, articles, research, and thoughts that I am still trying to squirm my way out of. So while I'm down here, I may as well drag you all with me. Please close your tray tables, put your seats in the upright position, and be sure to count how many rows of seats to your nearest exit as we nosedive into the depths of the British folk horror film, Lord of Misrule. Now, before I get any further into this renalysis video, I feel it incumbent upon me to put on my responsible YouTuber hat and make a formal statement acknowledging potential bias. This movie was written by screenwriter, author, director, cameo aficionado, and gentleman streamer Tom de Ville. When he's not crafting new ways to horrify and delight audiences, he can be found streaming an assortment of video games on his Twitch channel. For the past several months, I have been getting up at the ungodly hour of 4:30 a.m. to watch these highly entertaining streams live, and that is what led me to finding out about this film. When I decided to discuss the film on my channel, I reached out to Tom, who very kindly agreed to have a chat with me and answer my many questions about the film. And I know I've already said it several times, but thank you so much for taking the time to indulge so lowly a creator as I, my dear de Villigan. I will of course attempt to maintain objectivity, but I thought it only fair that I acknowledge this fact so that I may be judged accordingly by all you wonderful viewers as either a sycophantic fangirl or a genius of analysis, review, and impartiality. Okay, enough of this professionalism, it's making me feel dirty. Let's get into it, shall we? Oh, and as per usual, here is your spoiler warning for the video. If you haven't seen the movie and don't want it spoiled, go watch it now, then come back and finish watching this video. It's okay. I'll wait.
2 hours later.
Set in the fictional rural English town of Barrow, the film centers around vicar Rebecca Holland, played by Tuppence Milddleton, and her family, daughter Grace and husband Henry. Playing out over the course of 4 days, with each day delineated by a new chapter title, we follow Rebecca as she experiences a seemingly normal traditional festival that dates back centuries, which tells the story of the pagan spirit Gallogog that haunts the town and its people. While the urbane vicar and her husband dismiss the event as country people doing quaint country things, oh look at them, aren't they adorable, they need more God in their lives, the couple are willing to at least condescendingly observe, and all seems relatively normal village English chaos for such an event. Until Grace goes missing. Over the next 3 days, as Rebecca searches for her daughter, she learns more about the town and the history surrounding Gallogog. That he is not, in fact, an evil spirit which they drive out, but rather a protective one who ensures a safety and a good harvest, all for the low price of a child sacrifice, and who is represented in the village by his Lord of Misrule, the man whose child was last sacrificed to the spirit 12 years earlier, Jocelyn Abney, played by the wonderfully captivating Ralph Ineson. We learn that Grace is being held in Gallogog's mysterious black barn, and at the end of the 4th day she will disappear forever with Gallogog as his price for keeping the town fruitful. If Rebecca is to have any chance of saving her daughter, she must first bow her head and give her belief to the spirit, forsaking all other deities. A move to which she is pushed when the townspeople kill her husband at the behest of Jocelyn in a macabre recreation of the execution of the man who brought Gallogog to the town of Barrow all those centuries before. When Rebecca confronts Gallogog in his black barn, she is permitted to bring Grace out with her, though the child is lifeless and cold. Shocked by her reemergence, the townspeople accept her word that she is the new Lord of Misrule and murder their former leader at her direction, throwing his body on the pyre. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's just the Wicker Man, but with a chick. And certainly there are many reviewers that would agree with you. But to dismiss this film out of hand as simply a Wicker Man ripoff is both unfair and lazy writing. Look, I'll acknowledge the similarities. Religious main character searching for a lost child, blocked by a secretive town and its cult, which is led by a man with a distinct voice who loves capering, cavorting around town in a boss outfit, or at times no outfit, with no fucks given, claiming to be the speaker for the god. By the end, somebody's end up char-grilled on a pyre, and summer comes again! Because summer always comes again. But not before spring. Giggity. But unlike The Wicker Man, which for the record I did watch, both versions, because
No, not the beast! Not the beast!
in Lord of Misrule, I actually like the religious main character, and I'm invested in her search. There's also a plethora of interesting side characters in this film, my personal favorites being Miri and Ida Tremlow, and the villain of our piece is not just a one-note evil for the sake of evil because the upper classes are evil kind of villain. In fact, the more I watch this movie, the more I am just astounded by the character of Abney and the incredible performance given by Ralph Ineson. Indeed, the fact that the main protagonist of this movie, the one searching for the lost child, is that child's mother, firmly establishes the mundane horror which is prevalent throughout this film. Now, when I say mundane horror, I'm referring to a type of horror that isn't based in over-the-top, outlandish suspension of disbelief. Let's face it, what could be more horrifying to a parent than for their child to go missing? And this is a highly relatable, real-world problem. How many times have we heard reports of children going missing? Some of the most famous unsolved crimes revolve around missing children. While I'm not a parent myself, I do have 2 very beloved nephews whom I adore. And I assure you, were someone to so much as look at them funny, I'd bring down a world of hurt on that person. If either of them went missing, I'd tear the world apart to find them. I'm gonna stop thinking about that now. This theme of mundane horror is introduced quite early on in the film, actually during the opening sequence. We see Grace in her home, dressed in her Harvest Angel costume, and while standing in front of a mirror, she grabs a lock of her hair and rips it from her head. An action which is repeated throughout the entire movie by various townspeople because, despite Grace menacing a rabbit with a pair of scissors shortly after her hair ripping scene, no one in Barrow seems to be aware that scissors can also be used to cut things. Things like hair. But despite my constant aversion to these scenes and the incredibly cathartic moment where, during my interview with de Ville, I was able to, let's go with firmly voice my personal discomfort at these scenes as opposed to yelling at him that scissors are a thing, I must admit the reason for everyone ripping out their hair is rather genius. Allow me to explain. The greatest sense of trepidation comes from those bad things we've experienced and must watch others endure. Those who have experienced being beheaded aren't really in a position to discuss the sensation. Few are able to relate to being eviscerated, at least physically, and most people can only imagine what it might feel like to be pulled apart by horses while still conscious. But few people haven't experienced having their hair yanked at some time, especially if you have siblings or children. It's something to which almost everyone can relate and makes the scenes where people rip out their hair all the more horrific. Sometimes it's the little things that make you go, "Yeah, please stop." But don't just take my word for it. When discussing the different elements that make up the rituals surrounding Gallogog, de Ville mentioned an article he'd read years ago in a book titled Shock Express 2, a collection of articles on horror exploitation cinema. That is the best title ever, and I want one. That talked about the concept of insidious little globs. Further independent research by yours truly dug up that this is an idea attributed to writer, photographer, and film critic Anne Bilson, who posits the idea that the true horror of any film are those small moments of violence we have all experienced some version of, and it thus resonates so strongly with audiences. De Ville latched onto this idea like a hungry piranha and ran with it, creating so many uncomfortable moments for those of us who find the idea of having our hair violently removed from our scalp on par with nails on a chalkboard. And may I say, I'm really glad that de Ville did not at any point include nails on a chalkboard. That's not a challenge! And there is a purpose to the hair ripping beyond Tom just wants to make me feel the need to hit him every time it happens. The first ritual relating to Galogog is the gift of hair. As Abney describes it,
The gift of souls tied in hair. See?
so the hair is wound into the shape of a small poppet, a gift from the person not only of their hair, but also a ritual proving their dedication to the spirit. Lord of Misrule has 3 different rituals that culminate in the summoning of the Black Sun and Galogog's eventual appearance. As the repeated chant goes, the sign of blood is one that I found particularly delicious with the interpretation I got from how it develops. When one is on the day of the sign of blood, one must be very careful cracking eggs as they have a tendency to be bloodied with an undeveloped chicken fetus inside. Yummy! The first egg cracked is done in the background at Rebecca's house when locals come visiting to give support.
Oh god, eggs are off.
You think nothing of it. The eggs must be off in the sense of rotten. Well, okay, that's the assumption I made. Maybe I'm just stupid. I see you nodding. Stop it. Later, we see Abney cracking eggs in his house. He goes through 3 before the 4th one finally gives him the sign he wants, and he gives thanks. Then we have this scene.
Bugger it. Another duff one.
The implication here, to me, is that when the eggs were cracked in Rebecca's house, they weren't rotten. They contained blood and a chicken fetus. That throws a whole new light on the scene with Abney and his assumption that the bloodied egg was a sign to him of Galogog's favor. Rebecca was the first to receive the sign. Abney had to go looking. The difference between them is clear. Rebecca is blessed. Abney is merely a witness, and his time is soon to end. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know, but I like how my brain interprets it. The third gift is the gift of fire. All the fire. Fire everywhere. I'm not complaining, you realize. And what I love about this gift is how a Christian ritual is co-opted by the townspeople and turns into a pagan event. Earlier in the film, when Grace first goes missing, Rebecca gathers the townspeople into the church, and one of them yells out the idea of holding a candlelit vigil for Grace. Because when disaster strikes, there's nothing like thoughts and prayers to set things right. Thoughts and prayers, they're good for what ails ya. When the vigil is eventually held, Rebecca has learned about the town's faith and belief in Galogog, and realizes that these people are not here to help her. She knows they know more than they're saying, and the vigil becomes a kind of test of the town's willingness to actually help her. When she asks Abney to light a candle and say a prayer, he begins the refrain.
Blood, fire, sun gone, and all is as was. All is as was.
So here we have what started as a typical ceremony usually undertaken by Christians who do love a good candlelit vigil, and it becomes integrated into the local religion. One thing Christians loved doing once upon a time was wandering into towns and villages, taking a look at the local customs and beliefs, and corrupting them into their own ceremonies so as to bring those godless heathens under the grace of God. So I really love this subversion here of the Christian ritual being absorbed into the pagan one. Then the town captures Rebecca's husband Henry, and they recreate the death of Tobias Braun, who brought Galogog to the village centuries ago. When he had been executed by the church, they covered his head in a sack of pitch and burned him alive for his heresy. Such pretty fire. An added element that I really like, which plays into not only the idea of ritual, but how it's not just the pagans who have rituals, but also the Christians. We don't tend to call such things within the church as rituals, as the word tends to conjure up ideas associated with unsophisticated people and their barbaric beliefs, unlike the oh-so-educated and not at all humane truths of Christianity. But the rites practiced within Christianity are just as much rituals as the naked fire dancing enjoyed by the people of Summerisle. In Lord of Misrule, every time Rebecca prepares herself for a Christian ritual of some kind, the scene is juxtaposed against her adversary, the Lord of Misrule, and his rituals. They both even have their own special way of holding their hands when communing with their god. To me, this really underscores the point that both are sides of the same coin, unwavering faith in a supernatural entity. It also reinforces the point that both are religions in their own way, and the seeming universal perception that two separate religions cannot coexist. One must always reign supreme over the other. There are 2 lines about religion in this film that I really liked, and which really made me think. The first is when Grace and Rebecca are talking about the difference between Rebecca's god and the quaint local tradition around the town's silly little superstition.
It's not a good thing.
But at school they said that's where we give thanks.
Yeah, but a different kind of thanks. It's more like prayers. Old prayers.
Before God prayers.
No, it was always God. Just country prayers.
Then later, when Rebecca is trying to convince her husband about the town and its cult, she says this line.
Maybe this is just a bunch of people who were trying to find some meaning in their lives.
No. It's more than that. It's there. They've found something to believe in, and I know how wonderful that can be, but I also know how dangerous it can be.
Listen to yourself.
I like how it acknowledges that religion can be wonderful, because it can be. Faith can be a comfort in times of hardship and can help people navigate their lives. But I appreciate Rebecca's acknowledgement that religion can also be dangerous and used to hurt others. It's rather refreshing. While she has been a little dismissive of the town's beliefs, at no point does she call them straight up evil. She understands why they believe as they do, the comfort it brings them. She would never ask them to give up their faith, just to, well, not sacrifice their children to it. So, with the subjects of mundane horror and religious conflict readily apparent to even my oblivious and passive brain, I was most confident when I asked de Ville during one of his streams what the main theme of Lord of Misrule is. His reply? Brexit! Well, fuck. Luckily, during our discussion, he kindly expanded upon this theme, thereby saving me having to do any research on the subject. When de Ville was first approached to write the script, Trump was rising and Brexit was slowly tearing the UK apart. Cults of political personality were becoming near religious, and neighbour turned on neighbour as opinions shifted overnight. Outsiders became seen as suspicious, and those of a less tolerant nature were finally finding their opportunities to clean house, feeling free to air their xenophobic and prejudiced ways in the smug knowledge that political opinion would back them up. The refrain, "I don't recognize my own country anymore, I feel like an outsider in my own country," was oft repeated and echoing through the ears of many people, with both Trump and Brexit being false idols promising miracles. And it was these ideas that de Ville latched onto. And so you end up with a community that turns against itself, a cult that believes miracles will happen despite no real proof, and a belief so strong that the devout will hurt others at the direction of their leader without compunction in order to get what they want, or what they're told they should want. And thus we end up with both a protagonist and an antagonist who are outsiders, and both are seeking ways to connect further with their community, though they go about it in very different ways. Rebecca seeks to be integrated into the community and to be a part of it through trying to connect with the townspeople. She willingly participates in their celebrations, she lets her child participate in their festival, and makes a point of trying to get to know everyone and a little bit about them. Barriers thrown up against her are her own perception of them as inferior country bumpkins, as well as their resistance and suspicion of a newcomer, particularly one who represents a rival god. Abney seeks validation from his community. He is a lonely man bereft of his child, which he sacrificed for the greater good.
The greater good.
So he feels he has earned the town's gratitude and a place within it, crowbarring himself into a position of power through being the Lord of Misrule and the human representative of the town's god. He wants to force a community to form around him so that he doesn't feel alone. However, it doesn't work. The community recognize him as their Lord of Misrule, but there is no affection in it. It stems from fear, intimidation, and force of personality. Abney isn't an intense man, and his faith unwavering. That's difficult to fight against, and no doubt he did initially have the town's sympathy all those years ago when his son disappeared. But he used that empathy and twisted it to suit his own purposes, and instead of finding meaning in his life beyond his son's death, his entire purpose became wrapped up in that loss. His final line,
And take this pain from me.
shows that his attempt of the last 12 years to find connection has failed, and he is, in essence, almost soulless. His death becomes almost a blessing to him, never mind Gallagog, because he no longer has to live with the pain of his loss and the sense of being an outsider in his own community, a community which his family has been a part of for centuries. And we are then left with the final shot of the film, Rebecca holding mass, or whatever. I don't really know what denomination she's meant to be, and I recently learned that apparently there is such a thing as like Christian mass, just not Catholic mass. I don't know, the actual details of modern Christian practices eludes me, and frankly, I have no interest in it. I like the stories, but I'm an atheist, so Where was I? There stands Rebecca before a crowded church, holding mass, but clearly having switched gods, as we can tell by her change of appearance, her makeup and nails. And from the side comes Grace holding her hand as she preaches to the townsfolk. Will she be a better Lord of Misrule than Abney, or will she follow the same path as him? An ambiguous ending. Which is a great way to segue into the criticism section of this video. Smooth, huh? And there is a lot of ambiguity in this film. While there are hints of Galogog's presence around the town, they are fleeting at best, and could be easily dismissed as hallucinations, or a stiff breeze and menacing shadow which everyone is assuming is Galogog, when really, people are just making gods out of nothing. That ambiguity is shattered at the end when Rebecca confronts Galogog in the Black Barn. But there is such a thing as too much ambiguity, and that comes with the ending. When Rebecca brings Grace out from the church, it's possible to believe she's merely unconscious, a perception readily enforced when the next day we see her standing with her mother holding her hand. I interpreted this as Grace surviving somehow. Probably because I'm a sucker for a happy ending, and I like happy endings, and happy endings make me happy. I just like happy endings. What's so wrong about that? Shut up! But I wasn't the only one who interpreted the ending that way. While researching this video, I came across another review that also had the same idea. I then found a post on the horror subreddit talking about the movie where a few other people expressed their confusion over precisely what happened. Based on that assumption, I was quickly thinking up all kinds of wonderful things about how the worshippers influence the god and the evolution of a religion and or belief system based on its leader. But as I scrolled further on that subreddit post, I saw this comment, where someone pointed out that Grace was wearing the same clothes in the church at the end that she had died in, and I thought, maybe she didn't survive after all. As well as answering my copious questions, de Ville also very kindly sent me a draft of the script. It's not the final draft of the film, but it is, in his opinion, and I gotta agree with him, the definitive version. In that script, Grace's death, while seeming accidental, is not at all suggestive, but confirmed by Rebecca herself. Seeing Grace in the church at the end is meant to lead to a question of which god sent the vision, Jehovah or Galogog. Personally, I'd choose Galogog, at least he looks cool. While I appreciate the idea behind the symbolism of those who die never truly leave us, as well as the potential interpretation that the children who are sacrificed to Galogog become spirits who haunt their parents, and certainly the kind of cyclical nature perpetuating the idea that the Lord of Misrule is never quite able to let go of their child. Indeed, there are several moments in the film when Abney directly addresses and speaks to his lost son Thomas as though he's still there. I felt it was a little too, I want to say cryptic, but subtle is probably a better word for it, and I am many things, but subtle is not one of them. The ending as it stands in the film now is a real choose-your-own-adventure. If you want to believe she's dead, you can believe that. If you want to believe she's alive, you can believe that too. Viewer's choice. It's just that one involves death of the author, which isn't a bad thing, but the lack of clarity can make the ending a little confusing. I mentioned earlier the plethora of supporting characters, and each one is well portrayed. The entire cast is fantastic and does a great job. However, the one character that frustrated me to no end was the character of Rebecca's husband, Henry, played by Matt Stroke. Draco? Whatever. In a sea of well-developed characters and side characters, it's odd that Henry, Rebecca's husband, seems so underdeveloped and frankly kind of useless. He just sort of floats around, letting the police do their thing, talking about social media campaigns and talking to the media, but he's not as impassioned in the search for Grace as Rebecca is. He really doesn't seem to start taking any proactive steps until the third act, when he finally learns that the police have closed the case and realizes that the village really is caught up in a fever pitch of old gods and ancient rituals. There was a point where I began to wonder if he was in on it, if he knew the truth about the nature club where the kids were instructed in the history of Galogog, but he isn't. Even his death, while a great scene, loses its impact because honestly we never really get a chance to know him well enough to be upset when he's killed. Though I do appreciate that his method of execution recreates that of Tobias Braun and how it punishes the woman who is affiliated with the church that called for that execution centuries ago, all part of the gift of fire. Speaking of rituals, given that Galogog has 3 rituals of summoning which culminate in his appearance, and the movie takes place over 4 days, well, 4 and a bit technically, but who's counting? It would make sense for each day to feature a different ritual. The title cards for each day state, Day 1, Gift of Hair, Day 2, Gift of Blood, Day 3, Gift of Fire, and Day 4, All is as was. And while the first day, the gift of hair, does feature Grace making her puppet, we don't really see the rest of the rituals until the third day, the gift of fire. Given the way the rituals are all lumped together, it made me feel very, uh-oh, Galagog's coming, everyone look busy. As though now the town has proof that he was around, they suddenly cared about giving him his due, which rather undermines the idea that this is a town that has been paying tribute for at least 12 years, if not longer. For a town that is seemingly devout, so much so that they unfailingly believe that Abney's son was taken by the spirit, it seems a bit rushed. Though, to be fair, when they do get to that point, their fervor is undoubtable. Which leads me to my final criticism. Why Grace was taken. It's never explicitly said why, after 12 years, a child is once again taken by Galagog. The village seems prosperous, the people healthy, there's no mention of a failed crop or other catastrophe that could spur a sudden need for such a sacrifice to regain the god's favor. The choice of Grace as a sacrifice is easily enough deduced. What could be more powerful than the child of a rival religion and the eventual conversion of that religion's representative? As a vicar, Rebecca comes pre-packaged with a sense of piety and a need to believe in something bigger than herself, making it easier for Galagog to turn her, while likely also enjoying finally getting one up on those turbulent priests who killed his first Misrule so many years ago. When I asked de Ville about it, he mentioned that Rebecca's arrival is a catalyst, the new arrival bringing with her Galagog's old nemesis Christianity, as well as all her new ways and modern thinking. She is a threat to Galagog's power, and must be brought to bear. I like how this fits in with the us versus them, Christianity versus paganism, old versus new themes that are rampant throughout this film, but being as I'm a little bit of an oblivious moron, I completely miss this as being the result of Grace's sacrifice, so I'm making a point of letting everyone know I'm a bit of an idiot. Well, there goes all my credibility. But, those points aside, Lord of Misrule is a wonderful addition to the folk horror genre. With its beautiful atmosphere and gorgeous cinematography, amazing shot composition and use of film language. Its wonderful performances, particularly by Tuppence, Milddleton and Ralph Ineson. My favourite scene in the entire film is between these two in Abney's house, when Rebecca tries to find connection with another parent who lost a child, and Abney tries to guide her into acceptance of her loss. It's a fantastic scene. Grace's Harvest Angel costume is a wonderful creation that screams old world rural celebration. And of course, Abney's Lord of Misrule costume is brilliant. I want that damn mask. I love how he wears it on the final day in his confrontation with Rebecca when she emerges from the Black Barn. In fact, I love this whole shot. Look at that stance, the hip cant. It's such a great pose, and Ineson freaking owns it. The final thing I want to highlight is the music. The soundtrack was composed by Brett Detar, who is a longtime collaborator with director William Brent-Bell, having worked with him on The Devil Inside and Orphan First Kill. His score is wonderfully evocative and sent me down a rabbit hole about how folk horror soundtracks differ from those of other horror films, but I won't go into that here. I might do a future video on that subject. Let me know in the comments if any of you would be interested in that incredibly niche subject. What I really loved about the music in this film is how it adds to the world building, specifically the end credits song. Written in conjunction with and sung by British folk musician Sam Lee, the song tells the story of Tobias Bron, how he brought Galagog to Barrow, and his fate. With lyrics based on the original script, the tune is taken from the English folk song John Barleycorn, which makes me happy because it's a common thing for folk songs to share the same melody. And it's a lovely addition to the entire film to help create the world in which the story takes place, and I think really solidifies the dedication of every person on this production to create a film that is as believable and relatable as possible. If Galagog were a real spirit with a history of worship in a rural town that spans centuries, there would absolutely be a local folk song telling the story. Like all folk horror, this is a slow burn film, so if you want heart-stopping visuals, gore, and/or jump scares, this is not that kind of movie. But if you like atmosphere, a mystery, and, well, a fuck ton of ambiguity, I highly recommend this one. And if that's not enough of an incitement, here's a drinking game I created for people to play while watching this movie. I take no responsibility for any consequences, good or bad, that result from playing this game. Always drink responsibly and don't drink and drive, you might spill it. If you don't drink, try playing it with cake. If you don't like cake, well, it takes all sorts, I guess. Maybe try spoonfuls of Vegemite? Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review/analysis video. Again, I'd like to thank the legendary Tom de Ville for taking the time to chat with me about this movie and give me a lot of insight. And for helping me not have to research Brexit. Cheers, mate. You're a bloody legend. I realize this channel has been lagging a bit. I promise I'm working on stuff. I'm just terrible at time management.
And it took me ages because I procrastinate like a motherfucker.
I'm working on it, okay? In the meantime, let me know in the comments if you think I'm a master of maintaining objectification or an obsequious fangirl. And if you have any other movies you'd like me to bring my awesome intellect to bear on, let me know. In the meantime, stay safe, have fun, drive fast, take chances, and whatever you do, whatever you get up to, don't get caught.